Job Seeker Nation, what is happening? Thank you very much for joining us on this really rainy afternoon here in Chicago. I don't know what's happening everywhere else, but I definitely love being here with you guys as it always is the staple of my Wednesday. In fact, I do everything else around this show. Love having you here and glad you're able to join us as part of your lunchtime or wherever you are is 1 p.m. Eastern, always on Job Seeker Nation. What is happening? We've got a lot of things to talk about, so let's get going. Jack Kelly, how are you, sir?
Hey, good afternoon. So it's nice here. It's a nice fall day in New
Yeah,
Jersey. I'm looking out the window and like you see the kind of leaves have changed. It's a crispness in the crispness in the air. It's definitely a good feel.
yeah. Well, you guys always get our sloppy seconds from the Midwest to the East, so
Uh, so
it's
you're
pretty.
wishing the rain and bad weather on us.
So,
Thanks. I
well,
appreciate it. Yeah, great.
history has it that it's going to
Great.
happen. So, we got Chelsea J in the house, and thank you very much for Chelsea for joining us here on Job Seeker Nation. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you both for having me. It's good to see you again, Mark. Nice to meet you, Jack. I'm
A
excited to be
pleasure.
here.
Yes, Chelsea was on the Friday show. Definitely had to have her on the Wednesday show. So we are going to go ahead and get started with a couple of other things that we see in the news that it relates to you, as it relates to us, as it relates to we. So as I always tell you, we'll always interrupt what we're talking about to talk about what you talk about. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, you have a dilemma in your job search, ask us. We know. We're trying to help.
Is that you do the Biden thing? Do that whispering into? Is that
Yeah, I'm the problem
there?
whisperer. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, let's go ahead and get started. So, the Great Return has several different folds in it, as we know. One is for the fact that there are longtime workers who've been away from work, who have been
Mhm.
since the pandemic and returning to work. The other part is those who have been bounced around to these other companies and decide to come back to their original company, but with larger roles. And then two, there's other
Mhm.
stuff that's kind of in between that. So in the great return, and Chelsea, you may talk about some clients or some of the companies that you're working with. And Jack, of course, you talk to a lot of CEOs. I got a big CEO coming up that a lot of people will know in early December. I'll reveal that in a little bit.
Mhm.
Probably next week when I solidify it, but there's some interesting takes on it, and sometimes the CEO is not as bullish on the great return and the great resignation as you think. So we'll love you guys' takes. Chelsea, I'd love to start with you. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing out there on the trenches?
Yes. So, one of the main type of clients that I used to work with early on was people who would go back to their employers, whether
Mhm.
it be for a promotion or they left and they realized, oh, this wasn't really a good fit for me. But while that might seem good in theory, my number one question is always, why did you leave? What were some of the reasons that prompted you to start a job search in the first place? Because sometimes when we land in another environment that may not be ideal, we tend to put on those rose colored glasses and say, oh, well, I'm going to hop back because this is my safety net. I know everybody here. But if you left because there was no work life balance, or you weren't getting paid enough, or you weren't a fan of your coworkers or management, you need to take that into account to see if that's really the best step for you.
One of the things that I think people are also concerned about is that a lot of companies are looking at this new person, which is their old person, with their
Mm-hmm.
new set of skills now. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what is that looking like as far as them being accepted back or them being welcomed back? I know even some programs have onboarding, special onboarding for those who are returning
Mm-hmm.
and that on board is including people who went away, who work with other companies and come back, and
Mm-hmm.
also those that haven't been back in a long time, including those who've been pregnant, pandemic, and
Mm-hmm.
all that.
Absolutely. So, number one, if you left on great terms or that was always the goal to come back, of course, your organization is going to open you up with, well, welcome you back with open arms because that's
Mhm.
always the goal, right? So I do recommend whenever you are having an employee come back, or if you're coming back as an employee, to have a transparent conversation together so that you both can set the tone of what to expect, what you're looking forward to, the changes that you want to see in your role or in the organization or on your team, just to make sure it's a good fit for both of you all long term. So I think communication is key whenever you're going back to an organization or a company is calling you back.
Okay, now I'm
Okay.
unmuted.
Oh, there we go.
Now me.
It was
Yeah,
us.
yeah, yeah, Jack. So your
Yeah.
take on the present situation
You
of
know,
the
it's
Great
it's
Return?
it's interesting. I've um, recruited people to go back to companies where they came from, where they may have worked for company X. Then 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, they'll come back. Actually, there's one person I think came back 3 times, left,
Wow.
come back, and it's
Mm,
it's interesting. Some people have really strong feelings one way or the other.
Hmm.
Some people, if let's say you don't want to do it like a year later or 6 months later. It's kind of sometimes a little uncomfortable, awkward. It's not impossible, so awkward. Oftentimes, in my own personal experience, it'd be a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe, and they realize, hey, let me come back. One of the first things companies do, they're a little leery at first. Sometimes they're like,
mhm.
hmm, why did Mark leave? We got to check Jack before we interview him. Let's check. We'll just check our records and see, because they want to make sure they're not getting somebody who did it leave on their own volition. They were kind of shown the door, or there's some problem, so they want to kind of look and see what's happening. Um, Other times, people say, "Oh my gosh, yeah, we remember. Mark, he was great. He's fantastic. Yeah, let's talk to him again." I do have some people who just it's kind of ego, like I don't want to
Yeah.
go back because they
Hmm.
feel even if the job is better or higher end,
Right.
it's almost like they feel they're, no pun intended, going back, but they're going backwards. So that they feel just because they're going to the firm that they were before, they're losing momentum, they're not moving forward, so they just can't get past that mental hurdle to do it. But it depends. Sometimes it could be you just had there's a jerky boss and you love the company, you loved everything about it, but the boss was just a jerk, and now the boss left, and you're like, sure, I'll come back.
Yeah. Well, do you find that like the competition to go back, those who've been in, do you feel like they have an edge up because they're more familiar with the company, or do
Yeah,
they?
it's
What's
much easier
on
because
your end?
because then you figure, hey, that you have the background, you've done it, the company, maybe some people, a lot of the people are still there, so that you could just kind of slot in and just start like you've never left sometimes.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a very easy transition and easy onboarding, knowing the people, knowing the culture. So it does make sense where a company would say, hey, listen, we know the person who left, and we really like them, and we're sorry to see them leave. If they're going to come back, we'll welcome.
Yeah, yeah. Chelsea, do you see any hitches in competition when you have somebody who's familiar with the company is willing to go back?
It can go either way, right?
Hmm.
Because whenever you work at an organization, it's all about your presentation. Who do you get along with? Who do you have connections with? And what type of reputation did you build while you were there? Because you could be amazing at the role, but you could have had poor emotional intelligence, or you just really weren't a good team player. So I've actually had this work both ways. In my own career, I've been up against someone who was coming back, but they ended up hiring me because they said they wanted fresh blood and a new
Yeah,
perspective. So sometimes I think it really depends on what exactly that organization is looking for.
Yeah,
it's
and I think
interesting.
that's the one time. I think that's the one time too. People, if the organization doesn't want you, they'll ghost you. They won't.
Yes.
They won't. And I've seen that a couple of times where somebody said, "Oh, in my other company," and I even got a referral from one of the managers I used to work with and am familiar with, but I just never heard back with them. So you shouldn't take for granted that the way you left may be
Right.
the way that you may not come back in the same door. So I think there's
Mhm.
some caution there and different things, but you should be able to feel it out. And sometimes it even takes you trying to call
Mhm.
yourself and try to make those calls, and then it doesn't always end well there either. But do you speculate that that might become more of a movement, Jack, and coming back to other company, coming back to the
You
same
know,
companies?
I don't know. I think there'd be a certain amount of people who would do that.
Hmm.
But because it's a hot job market and there are a lot of jobs opening,
Mhm.
I think the last report was about over 10 million jobs are available. So
Hmm.
you have more choices. If you didn't have a lot of choices, then you might say, "All right, I'll go back. I don't want to go back, but at least me, I still know people. Maybe they can get me in."
Hmm.
But if you have other choices, I think a lot of people say, "Yeah, let me do something new. Let me do something different.
Mhm.
Let me just kind of see what else is out there." And then maybe as a default, they feel they can kind of go back and say, well, I know Chelsea, I know Mark. I think they'll welcome me back.
Mhm.
So that's my safety net. That's just in case. That's my plan B. If nothing else works, maybe I'll go back.
Well, I find that interesting, being that we now have such a chasm between sectors, and that not just jobs available, it depends where the jobs are. And I think that's where,
Mhm.
people say, well, there's 10 million jobs. So what kind of jobs are they? So I think in trying to answer that question, you have to be somewhat familiar, not with just the job and the company. You also got to be interested, Chelsea, in the industry at large, wouldn't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And, I do encourage, because I want to talk about on the job seekers end and then on the employers end as
Go
well.
for it. Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I tell job seekers all the time that they need to be intentional in the decisions that they make is because that is going to reflect you, and it's going to reflect your reputation at the company too. And
Mhm.
I say that because if going back to is your plan B until something better comes along, you're also putting that organization and your team in a bind too. And
Mhm.
you went in there knowingly doing that. And I say that because I've personally witnessed employees come back two, three, sometimes four times. And at a point, the employer's like, hey, you came back for a year or two, then you left again, then you came back, left again. When does it stop? Because now you're taking up, an employer's time and resources too, and you're taking
Mhm.
that knowledge with you in a new person and train them all over again. So, I mean, you need to think about it for everyone involved.
Yeah, and I think for the person that's applying to the jobs, of course, they're
Mhm.
once I mean, depending how what they go there for, hopefully they're getting
Mhm.
some added skills if you're going to leave a little bit early, right?
Right.
Jack, what is like recruiting on the recruiting side when you have people who are coming back, and what kind of conversations being had behind the closed door between
Uh,
the job seeker and the recruiter?
it's a good question. It depends on the situation because you could have somebody who maybe was a junior person and they enjoyed
Mhm.
their experience, they did well, but for
Mhm.
whatever reason, maybe there was an advancement. They leave, but now they come back as a different person. Like
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
like Chelsea, Mark, think about yourself.
Mhm.
Our 3 years ago, 5 years ago, you're probably very different and doing like
Right.
Chelsea, we were talking before the show. Only within a month or so, you've kind of pivoted to do something that you haven't been doing before. So it
Right.
could be where
Mhm.
you're coming back and now you're a different kind of person bringing different skills to the table. So
Mhm.
that when you bring them in the door, you could actually maybe come in as a higher level than you would have been if you stayed that whole time. So there could be some upside. And as I mentioned before, sometimes, and Chelsea pointed to it, sometimes with companies, they're a little leery, like, are they going to do this again? Are they going to treat us like a revolving door?
Mhm.
It's almost like a relationship. You break up, oh, let's get back
Right.
together. Oh, let's break up. And after a while, it's like, I can't do this anymore. This is just not, it's not healthy
Mhm.
to go back and forth and back and forth. So sometimes companies and managers say, you know what, we let's get someone fresh, someone different, someone new, no baggage, no what have you, and we start clean slate. Um,
Yeah.
so so I think it's definitely an option. It's something people should keep on the table unless they have like
Mhm.
the company they left was really toxic and they did really horrible things. Then clearly you don't want
Mhm.
to go back. But if they treated you nicely, they were good people, and everything was great, maybe put the ego aside and it could, and then keep an open eye and keep an open mind to see all right, maybe it makes sense to take another look.
Yeah, and those of you who are in the chat, if you have experience going back to an old company, or you've been on the other end as far as the HR side, where you talk to someone come from another company, feel free to give us a holler and let us know what your experience is. I've seen people actually go and then they get recruited back, which is another part of the
That's a good point
conversation.
for the company itself, right?
Because
Yes,
right
yeah,
from the
that's a good
company
point. Yeah,
itself, they go and reach out and say, we didn't want you to leave to begin with, and for
Right.
whatever reason, they bring them back. What kind of do companies, Jack, have to kind of put a little bit more incentive in bringing somebody back? I guess it depends the reason why they left and all that kind of thing, huh?
it depends, and it depends what they're doing now, because it could be, Jane Doe or John Doe is out of work, and then you hear there's out of work and say, huh. Let's bring him or her back because they were always good. They're in between jobs, but they're also thinking, hey, maybe we can get that person on the cheap because they're
Yeah.
in between jobs and take advantage, which happens. And this is wrong. When someone doesn't have a job, companies do feel like, all right, we don't have to pay them as much as we would have ordinarily because they don't have
Mhm.
the negotiating power because they're leaving. They don't have a company to give them a counter
Hmm.
offer. So it
Right.
could be
Mhm.
they reach out and want to bring that person back and say, hey, come in here thinking they'll pay less. Also, sometimes what happens is that, let's say a job, is open there and they're like, who could be good? You go, oh, Chelsea, she was great here. And I know she left. It wasn't because she was
Mhm.
angry or anything or felt, aggrieved. It was just, got recruited away for a better opportunity. Let's see
Hmm.
if we can kind of steal her
Mhm.
back. Well, let's see if we can entice her. And then
Mhm.
if you still have the same crew there, they say, yeah, she was awesome. Let's do it. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, let's do it. Let's bring her back. So you do see all these
Mhm.
variations of a theme, how that plays out.
Sure, sure. And I think too, a lot of it has to do with, and I'll say this: there was a time when there were companies that were doing that back. I remember in the early 2000s. It was very interesting because I saw
Mhm.
people going back and forth between companies because what he did was he went and got skills from the other company. And the other
Yeah.
company knew who he was, said, let's go get him back and
Mhm.
we'll pay him double. So he got into like the mid hundred thousands at that particular point until of course the financial break, and then it went to crumble. But having said that, though, you just never know when you're going to need that next company if you don't stay ready. And the financial industry just kind of went and tanked for the most part. And he was one of the ones that worked between those five to six companies that had that whole thing. So even though you may enjoy the benefits of going back and forth, you should still remain job search ready because you just
Right.
never know what will happen to the industry.
Yeah, you brought up something interesting,
Yep.
Mark, about coming back and getting a big increase. That's kind of one of the little dirty secrets of looking for a job is that
Hmm.
if if you stay with the same company for a long time, let's say you're in a big organization and you're there for a number of years, chances are you're going to get kind of small increases every year.
Mhm.
But if you
Hmm.
leave and go somewhere else to a competitor, you may get a 10, 15, 20, 25% bump up on the base
Just
as a
because.
premium.
Yep.
Yeah, just
So
because.
then, so if you do that a couple of times, your compensation really grows pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Because in Mark's example, let's say you're at 100 and then you get a 20,000 increase. Now you're 120. You stay a few years, and then
Right.
you move. Now you're at 140, and then you move, and then the same person who you were peers with stayed there, and there's going to be a huge gap between the two.
Oh yeah.
So I don't want to advocate people
Yeah.
job hopping for the sake of job hopping, but since you brought up, it literally pays. I mean, it literally pays to kind of
That
shop it
yes.
around.
Yeah. Well, I think the job.
That's very
Go ahead,
real.
Chelsea.
Oh, I was just going to say that is very real.
Yeah,
I've done it in my career and I've worked with clients who have had to do it in theirs as well. And it is disheartening for people who come into an organization new and they get that raise, and you have all of your other employees who have been there for years still making the same thing. So that's something that employers have to change as well when it comes
Yes.
to their annual compensation and what they're doing to retain their employees. Because at some point, you can't blame people for leaving because, you've seen our inflation rates this year.
Chelsea, that's a great point because let me ask you what you think about this. Yeah, this always
Mhm,
boggles my mind. I'll have a candidate, and let's say just to make numbers even, they're making
mhm,
100,000. They go, "Oh no, we can't hire because we have Chelsea and Mark and Jack who've been here, and they're only making 90,000." So then my
mhm.
response was like, "Well, you're not paying them what the market is worth.
Right.
You're underpaying them. So why? I mean, so why not hire the person who you like and the person is good, and then just bring up the compensation of the other people because it's obvious. And let's assume for this conversation, it's not just the
Mhm,
candidate I'm sharing, but other candidates of that with that caliber of experience earning the same amount. So that's what the market is. So if the market is what this person is doing, that means you're underpaying and actually taking advantage of your current employees. And as Chelsea, as you were saying, in
mhm,
this kind of inflationary time when everyone's worried because everything is going up, and if your comp isn't
mhm,
going up, what do you think your employee is going to do? They're going to leave. They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to say, you know what? F you guys. You're taking advantage of me. So it's a
absolutely.
weird quirk that goes on all the time.
Absolutely. And think about the environment that you're creating whenever you do that, right? Because you have your employees who have been there, and employees read job postings. So they're able to
Right. So they
see,
know what's going on. Right.
they know what people are making,
Right.
and people in the organization talk. So now you're creating an environment where people do not feel equal. And the
Yeah.
new person coming in with great intentions, ready to blend in and, make, friends and good acquaintances. Now you have a target on their back and they just started. And now they're like,
That's such
why
a
is
great
everybody
point.
treating
Yeah.
me like this? And then they
Mhm.
might eventually leave because they're like, wow, this is a toxic work environment. Everyone here is mean to me and they didn't welcome me. So, I mean, that pay gap, it brings up so many
Right?
issues.
And you can't even blame the employees because it's not that they hate the new person who came in. It's just they're kind of just
Right.
angry and feel cheated and feel like ripped off.
Oh,
And
wait. Oh, there's another wrinkle to this, and this happened to me when I was a manager, is that if you have employees that were on, um, they have a the market rates a little differently than managers in
Hmm.
certain areas. So you got situations where the employees start to make more than the manager does, and then the manager says, "Wait a
Hmm.
second, I got employees that are making more than me."
yes,
Yep.
Particularly, especially if they work on extended time or what we may know as overtime, or that's in their contract that they're getting compensated for a certain amount for working more than the 40 hours. But the manager, of course, is on salary. So the salary
Hmm.
doesn't move any because it doesn't matter how short or long you work, more of the times than not, you work longer than the employee does. You are not getting the benefits of the market rate of your employees going up because
Right.
you're on salary. So that also builds a disgruntled manager, no less. And it does not always relegate to that first line supervisor. It also regulates
Hmm.
to his boss, and sometimes it is his boss's boss. Now, the boss's boss might have a link to, might have the, senior manager's ear, but everybody else doesn't. So you end up in that situation where the manager doesn't get that benefit as well, unless that's built into the contract. Of course, that comes into a whole nother conversation about negotiation,
Right.
but nevertheless, that's happened too.
Absolutely. And it creates tension within relationships too. Managers and employees, it, creates resentment as well. And when people are resentful in your organization, what does that decrease? Your productivity levels, because then no one is caring about the work that they put out. And I always try to tell employers that your employees are your best advocates and champions for you. So you need to make sure that they're happy so that they can actually recruit top talent for you just by spreading the word about your organization.
you know
And
what,
some,
Chelsea?
go
It
ahead,
sounds
Jack.
like You know what I would suggest? You should probably be a career coach for companies to help them retain people.
Mhm.
It is so
What do you
funny that
think?
you say that, Jack.
What do
I
you
love
think?
it. That was an
Right?
amazing segue right there. Yes, that was perfect. It's funny because I actually just made a pivot with my own company. And after working with job seekers for so long and seeing a lot of the struggles that they go through and inequity that they face on a regular basis, I was like, I actually want to do something at the top level and help them from there. So I just did a soft launch on Chelsea J Consulting, and I will be working with large organizations to teach them strategies to reduce employee turnover, increase engagement, and create better working environments. So that way everyone wins in the end.
That's
Yeah.
great. What do you think? Like, what would be some of the, let's say Mark and I were the company, your client.
Mhm.
What would you recommend to us? And clear, and I know that's not a fair question
Yeah.
because you don't know. I'm not giving any context like what company we have or what we're doing. But what's like just a general kind of thing that you would suggest to do?
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a few things, but the number one thing that I always recommend is listen to your employees, get feedback from them because they will tell you what's going on. And one of the things that I always recommend and champion is doing those employee cultural and satisfaction surveys just to see where everyone is at. How do they feel about management? How do they feel about the decisions that are taking place? How do they feel about the way that your company handled COVID or just handles crises, period? You need to listen to your employees to know what they're thinking and where they want to see improvement, because that's how you really start to make improvement. And that's one of the things that my company does. I do employee surveying on their behalf.
That's
Mm.
great. And
Yeah.
what? So you'll ask basically the employees, how you feel about this, how do you feel about something else, and so on. And then
Mhm.
when you take it to management, do you think management's going to really listen, or they're going to be like, oh, okay, or make excuses when they bring up issues?
Oh, so we're going to talk about it. And you both know that I'm unfiltered and uncensored. And one of the things that I do is cut through the BS and get right to the issue and give you actionable steps that you can take to actually make a difference. And some of the things that, easier to change if you don't want to implement them yourself, I'm happy to do it. A lot of companies have issues with their onboarding process, which is why a lot of employees leave prematurely because they were never introduced to the organization properly. Another problem a lot of employers have, which is something else that I help with, is job descriptions. A lot of these job descriptions are extremely outdated. So when you put them out there and you're recruiting people, people think that they're getting hired to do something, and then they turn around and do something else. And now you have a disgruntled new staff. So we talk about that. We talk about the way you communicate with your staff too. A lot of companies just make decisions and throw it in an email. We all know that's inappropriate and doesn't work. So, I mean, there's so many things that I'm looking forward to talking to organizations about and really helping them create a collaborative environment.
When you say Chelsea, when you talk about the onboarding too, now
Mhm.
that a lot of companies are going to be remote or hybrid, does that present another big challenge because you don't have everybody in one place?
Absolutely. And when you are working remotely, and as entrepreneurs, we all know this too, you can feel very isolated very quickly, even if you have a family at home. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I strongly believe that every new employee needs a mentor. You need someone who you can go to and strategize with and talk to and develop a relationship with, and someone who can advocate for you too. Because when you're a new employee, you need a point person to go to and someone who you can confide in. So that's one of the things that I strongly recommend, just so you don't feel as isolated and alone.
I love
Yeah.
that.
I
As a
was going to say,
mentor,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to say that the mentor also can articulate the problems and challenges that the new employee can't. A lot of times,
Right.
as a new employee, you're thinking, "Well, this is kind of the way it's supposed to go, right?" And then the
Mhm.
older employee says, "Absolutely not." And they
Mhm.
also can see. they can also see the challenges with the end in mind because they've
Yep.
experienced it, or they see that there are patterns that within the company that the new employee doesn't see, and they can address it to whoever can make the change. But a lot of times, it's also the dilemma of, okay, who actually will make the change? Because
Hmm.
everybody's looking to the next person and saying that person's in charge, and I report to them, and everybody's pointing up the ladder, and the president says, "I don't care anything about that."
Hmm.
Because they care about a much larger picture in the long run. So there is
Hmm.
that dilemma of who's gonna really make the change, and who's gonna sign off finally, because everybody's gonna point to somebody else being the problem many times it's we don't know who is supposed to make all these changes, so therefore nothing ever gets done.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that has really worked for me throughout my career with management and when I was an executive director, even just talking to the board members, I would say you may not care about this little stuff, the stuff you perceive as little, but you care
Mhm.
about your bottom line. And this little stuff will eat up your bottom line within the next 2 to 3 years. So let's talk about it and create some accountability and some real action.
All right, wait. So how did you get? So you're getting to the point. I'd love to hear, and I think the
Mhm.
listeners would like to know too. So you said that so casually. How do you get
Mhm.
the ear of the board of directors? Because that's a big move
Mhm.
to get their
Absolutely.
attention.
Yes, so I was an executive director, so of
Mhm.
course they were my supervisors and we had a monthly board meeting. So at that monthly board meeting, that is where I would bring up any issues that I saw within the organization, what I wanted to do and what I wanted them to do. And I have found that whenever you see an issue or something going on within an organization, don't just talk about the issue, come up with a solution, right? Whether it's hiring a consultant or revamping your onboarding process, whatever your solution is, have that ready to present to them and let them know what your timeline is as well. And that's what I would do.
I gotta take notes on this. This is good stuff. So when you say to them, like, you're in the boardroom, right? I'm picturing,
Hmm.
this mahogany table, oak
Hmm.
wood surroundings, very nice leather chairs,
Yeah.
right? And you're telling these directors, basically, all right, everyone hates you guys because this is what you're not
Hmm.
doing. But I have a solution.
Hmm.
Do
Hmm.
they listen? Do they cringe? Do they like how does it play out?
Yep. So I believe in honesty and full transparency. And that's the first thing that I tell people, even when I'm hired into an organization. I am always going to be honest. I'm always going to be transparent. And I am always going to speak my mind. If you can handle that, we can work together. If you can't, we might not be a good fit. So when you go to people with the truth or something that's not, the prettiest of topics to talk about, you can expect, a response with a little bit of hostility or anger. And I think just anticipating that and not taking it personally is key. So after I say something, I let people, be in their feelings for as long as they need to. And after they get that off their chest, I always say, okay, now let's move forward. Now that you're upset, I know that this is where change can start. So let's move forward and take some action so that we don't have to have this conversation again.
What are some of the changes you help make at these organizations?
Yeah, policy development is a big one. When I was working in the nonprofit world, I noticed that policies weren't always up to date. And when you don't have up to date policies, people will do whatever because there's no rules. So, policy development was always one of them. Changing around the hiring process as well, the questions that you ask in interviews, how you conduct interviews, how you find talent, what your brand is within the community. We worked on that too. So I had a lot of projects when I worked in nonprofits.
Did you find that you were taking on those projects by yourself?
I would always create a committee because I learned early on. I used to try to be superwoman. I used to try to do everything on my own. And I got to a point where I was like, there's not enough hours in the day. I am burnt out, can't do this. So I find people that I can trust and that want change as well and have a variety of skills too and things that I may not be good at. And I typically put together a committee And for accountability, we'll have a meeting every so often, whether it's every other week, once a month, with progress and benchmarks and goals, and just kind of go from there. And I noticed that that helped tremendously with a lot of my goals.
And I was just thinking that while you were talking, said a lot of times that creates people leaving the organization because uh,
Hmm.
they're told in one breath, "This is your job," and then you say, "Well, right, where is that in my job description?" Well, I haven't
Hmm.
written it down yet, so nobody can point to, nobody can actually
Hmm.
point to the policy or the change that's supposed to happen. But
Yeah.
it's your job because somebody says so, not because it's written. And Lord knows when it's advertised, that says completely something different. And I think that's
Hmm.
where the discrepancy is a lot of times, that people become unsatisfied because they don't
Yep.
get the clarity that they need. So they think that, whatever comes out of the mouth of their boss lately is going to be the thing they're going to hang their hat on. And then it could change at any moment. So that used to be your
Yep.
job. Now your job is this. It's like, oh gosh, is this a sliding scale? What is this? So I think people become
Yeah.
unsatisfied because of the lack of stability and the lack of information and clarity that gets lost in the translation. A lot of times, as you've been part of nonprofits. I've worked in
Hmm.
nonprofits as well. Nobody
Hmm.
comes back with clarity. Said we met, okay,
Right.
and they said we've got more work to do, and that's like, this has been going on for a year. How long can people be in a job unsatisfied or unfulfilled in a year? Not very long.
Absolutely. And if you have that problem where people are saying, this isn't my job, or, I signed up to do this and I'm doing something different, that's on you as the employer. You have a problem that needs to be solved, because really 80% of the time you should be doing what's on that job description. And if you're
Mhm.
not, we need to reevaluate what your job description is, what your job title is. Does the pay need to change? Do you even like this? You know what I mean? There's a lot
Mhm.
of things that need to be reevaluated. And that's why I say that job description update is a huge one. The way people interview is a huge one too, because I notice a lot of the time in interviews, they don't even really talk about the job itself. Candidates have to end up asking questions about the actual role, which is bizarre. Like, you applied to this job and we're not really talking about the job.
Yeah. Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, I'm just listening. It's really interesting. I give you credit because trying to change these big plotting companies is not an easy task.
Yeah, I think
And
they call it change management, and for the
it's
most
hard.
Mhm.
part, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to do. And I give you credit for being able to do that and having the patience to do that. And I really I like your idea about putting a committee together,
Mhm.
because if you go in yourself, it could be like, oh, it's just her saying it or just this guy saying it, whoever. But if you have a
Mhm.
committee around you, it just gives it an air of there's unity, and we've kind of all looked into it. It's just not one person saying you have to change. You have a group of people. So it's harder if you're that board of director person
Mhm.
to say to a whole group, "Oh, you're all wrong." Like, how are we all? How, we're 10 of us. So all 10 of us are all crazy, or maybe
Mhm.
maybe it's you that doesn't really get what's going on. So
Absolutely.
that's a really good practice to do that. And I love the other things we're saying too. First, just listening, asking questions and listening. So often, I think that's a problem with companies, that the managers and supervisors don't go out of their way to say, Chelsea, Mark, how are you? How are you doing? How are you coping?
Mhm.
Do you have too much work on your plate? Is whatever it might be, to reach out and then actively listen,
Mhm.
Mhm.
because it's not easy. Most people listen, but they're just waiting to talk. But actively listen and hear what
Right.
they have to say, and then really acknowledge it, and then take the actions you can. So those are I think it's really great advice.
I do
Absolutely.
too. I do too. And one of the things I was just thinking about talking about job hopping is just how can somebody from the outside who's going to be interviewing on the inside, what are some signs that where there is constant change and
Mhm.
in someone's life, what kind of advice would you give to someone who has changed 3 times in the last 5 years for various different reasons. Uh, Sometimes they upskill, sometimes it's dissatisfaction, sometimes it's to find satisfaction. What kind of what would be the best way to explain that? Maybe, or maybe you could take a page from your experience on how to explain constant change within your career path.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So, number 1, you need to ask yourself and be honest with yourself. Why are you job hopping? What is it? Because in my career and when I've talked to my clients, there's often patterns that come up with the reason that they're job hopping. Whether
Mhm.
they say it's bad management or low pay, not a great work environment, too much commuting, whatever it is, why do you keep landing in those specific roles? I found for
Mhm.
myself that I would personally ignore red flags because I'm one of those people. I'm a fixer. So I'm like, oh, it's a red flag, but I'll fix it. It's okay. I'll fix it when I get here. But
Mhm.
that's not always the case. You know what I mean? Like I can't fix everyone. And I had to get over my own hang up thinking I could fix everything and actually paying attention to some of those red flags early on so that I would avoid that. Now,
Mhm.
another example, I had a client that I recently worked with. I said, why have you moved around so much? And they said, well, the pay. I was making a low wage here, then making a low wage there, making a low wage there. And my question is, why do you keep applying to low paying jobs? What is that? Is there a self esteem issue? Or are you rushing into roles out of desperation? What is it that you are doing? And after doing some coaching and work, we found out that they didn't feel they were worthy of a certain salary. So that's the root cause that we have to get to what is going on that's causing you to do that. Now after that, we need to put your story together. And you need to be confident and comfortable in your story as well. So knowing what you're looking for is number 1 because when you go to an organization, you want to sell why you know that they're the organization for you. And you can simply say, I've learned that through these years of experience, this is something that I value in an employer. And I know that you all have it because I've done my research. I've talked to your employees. I like that you embody this. So you need to be able to talk about why you want to work for them. You also need to be able to be comfortable with sharing what you've learned in previous roles and the skills that you've gained and how you want to use those to move forward at their organization and help them meet their bottom line as well. So
Mhm.
just a couple tips.
Okay, okay. Jack, you come from the recruiting end.
Yeah.
When you hear people change the narratives that people come up with, what's a good narrative and what's a bad narrative to you?
Yeah. It's, as we were talking before about how if you switch jobs, you'll get that extra premium. But I would caution people, you don't want to jump too much because then when you tell your story, it gets harder. So let's say
Mhm.
you only had 1 or 2 moves. You can explain it away. Hey, here's what
Mhm,
happened with this. Here's what happened with that. And then Chelsea and
mhm,
Mark would kind of say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense," and that's it, and you move on. But if you
mhm,
have three, four, five, six, it's it
mhm,
becomes like excruciatingly painful for a job seeker to start explaining each time they had to leave, why they left, and what happens after a while. I don't have a hard and fast number, but then
mhm,
you could tell the hire managers, the interviewers start pulling back like, uh, and they get this feeling like you're just going to come here and you're going to leave, and we're going to be another stop, on your journey, and you're going to leave. So they kind of zone out. So if you're
Mhm.
looking and you don't want to go too much, you don't want to go too many times because that could backfire on you.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of times too, hiring managers feel that the person who keeps moving is a good salesperson and they can really sell themselves on the job
mhm,
so that when they go in, they're amazing at interviewing, they're charismatic, they're charming, they're smart, and they get the job. But
Mhm.
then 6 months, but 6, 7 months later, management realizes, wow, this person is all style and no substance. and the person, he or she knows that themselves. So then they're starting to work on the next stuff. So before they're being told to leave, they're going on and trying to find another role somewhere else. And it's this weird self-fulfilling prophecy, just like you were saying, Chelsea, where somebody
Mhm.
doesn't feel good enough that they're asking for more money. This charismatic person who knows they can get a job also knows they're not that great, so
Mhm.
they got to keep moving. They got to stay one step ahead. So
Mhm.
it's really interesting to see these different patterns emerge, and for the person who keeps jumping, after a while you have to say, wait a minute. Just like you were saying, Chelsea, why are you not asking for more money and finding that better quality job? Same thing. Instead of just
Mhm.
trying to schmooze and get a great job, find a job that you could really do. Stay there and build equity and just grow your career there and stop just keep moving. So it's there's a lot of these weird kind of things that go on behind the scenes.
I bet. And I think when you talk about, you know, if you're a job hopper, I think
Mhm.
the few that I've seen over the last few years have control of their narratives and they have control of their careers, and you're able to show
Yeah.
that you have. So I went and got this skill, and my company doesn't use this skill, but you guys use this skill, and I've shown my proficiency in using these things. So therefore I'd
Mhm.
rather work with you than to work with them. That seems to go over real well. What doesn't seem
Mhm.
to go over real well is that you're always running from the fire. You're always running from the crossfire. Oh, bad management. Oh, bad circumstances.
Mhm.
Oh, I couldn't stand my boss. Oh, my boss couldn't
Yeah,
stand me.
that's the
And shows
worst.
that
Yeah.
shows
Yeah.
that you're not in control of your management, and that brings up the red flags. So I think
Mhm.
when job seekers are thinking about job hopping, they have to show that they're controlling the narrative. So whatever
Yeah.
narrative, it's got to be true, but it's also got to
Mhm.
show that you were strategic and you were thoughtful and that you were intentional, as Chelsea talked about. And those things are really important because if people see that, wow, I am really in control of my career narrative, then I can go ahead and present that, and then it explains, that you can ask for your 20 and your 25%. 10%
Mhm.
you can pretty much get because it's an
Mhm.
accommodation or market rate they're going to give you for changing your job. We're glad to have you. Here's 10%. To get the other 10% and the other 15%, you have to show the value. And unless you're able to show
Right.
the value, then of course that's not going to be. Now, I think there's a difference
Mhm.
between, and a lot of the people don't job hop enough or don't change careers
Mhm.
because they're waiting for the company to do something. And that's
Mhm.
another discussion we can have. In other words, they're waiting for the company to provide this training so that maybe they provide this training, then I can go to the next and use that as leverage, which a lot of times you'll be waiting more time than you think you'll wait, as opposed to you taking control. Say, I wouldn't got that. I paid for it myself. The company wouldn't pay it, but doggone, this is how I can get the value out of it. I can go where they're using these particular skills,
Yep.
then you can go ahead and have that as a part of the way that you build a career. But you have to be intentional and you have to kind of show that and show that you had that
Mhm.
command of your career and not just be the victim of bad decisions. And I think there's a difference.
Absolutely. You brought up a really good point too. And I just want to mention this because sometimes people don't think about it, but you can negotiate professional development opportunities during the
Yes, you
interview
can.
process as well,
Yes.
because recruiters and hiring managers understand that not all companies have the budget for professional development. So if that's what you're looking for, negotiate it up front and let them know that that's what you're looking for. And while you're there, you want to continue to grow and get whatever certification it is you want so that they know what you're
Negotiate it,
expecting.
negotiate with a timeline,
Mhm.
because they can keep using that as bait to keep you another year. And you
Right.
end up being there 3 years later. Where was the professional development?
Exactly.
And I've been with some companies that had questionable culture, but the one thing
Yep.
they did, they helped you develop your career. And good Lord, I took advantage of it at that particular time. You betcha,
Yep.
I dived into everything, and it was okay. In fact, they even encouraged you to take the whole day if it was even a half a day of
Mhm.
development. But on the other hand, the other companies that may have some other things right, but the professional development isn't there, and they may have promised you. They didn't say when that you would get it. It's like the birthday. If you don't, if you aren't sure when your birthday is, they say, "Oh, on your birthday," you could be led down a road that
Yeah.
that never ends. So I think definitely again when you show that control, you
Mhm.
can make some traction there, and also you control the narrative. The fact that the more you control the narrative, you can cut out some
Mhm.
of the doubts of the job hopping. Your single tip as we get closer to the top of the hour of what people should be doing. The one thing or one or two things that people should be doing looking for a job during the holiday. Of course, we don't want them to stop looking for sure.
Right.
We know that. We know that job search should continue if you don't have a job or at least somebody offering you a job. Chelsea, you're up. Your one or two tips for job searching in this holiday spirit.
All right. Well, during the holidays, you are going to be around a lot of family and friends, and a lot of people feel a sense of shame when they're in the job market. But get rid of that and let people know that you are available, you're in the market, and you're looking, because the more people know, the more that people can look out for you. So I say continue to network, let people know what your skills are and where you're at and what you're looking for, even at the dinner table.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Jack.
See, she stole my thunder. I was going to say something similar in that use the time to network because it's a great excuse. It's Thanksgiving and the holidays and the New Year. So what better way to reach out to people? Chelsea, hey, we haven't spoken in a while. What are you doing for the holidays? So on. We should get together.
You're coming
And
in
oh,
real
hey,
fuzzy.
oh, yeah. And then by the way, yeah, still.
Yeah, yeah, a little, but go ahead.
No.
People can.
Yeah, so that it gives you the ability to reach out to folks because
Mhm.
it's a holiday, so you expect that. And then
Mhm.
by reaching out, you can kind of get the conversation going. You get the conversation going, and then you slip in that maybe you're looking for a job. Do you know anybody? Do you have any opportunities? So it could be kind of very organic, and it's a good way to do it. And then the other part would be to keep sending resumes, keep looking, because most people pull out of the job market when you get from now till the New Year's. So that as people pull out, if you just keep going, you're going to stand out because there's going to be less competition.
Yeah, yep, I agree. I think one of the things that people are not taking advantage of the professional development during the holidays. I think that's one another
Mhm.
opportunity that people can learn, and don't be afraid to go out and like I kind of alluded before, pay for it yourself if you when you can. I understand budgets are tight and all that, but the more you have control over the type of training, the better you'll get a better return on it. If a company says that, oh, we need you to train here, and that's not what
Mhm.
the market is looking for, then you have, but you didn't get that when you were. While you were employed, now's the time to do it. Get the training that you want to take that next step. And people try to make that more complicated than it actually is. It
Mhm.
really isn't because one, I think people are unfocused or not focused on what kind of industry they want to be in. But I think it's a good time too to also lock in a particular industry, even if you may just going to be here despite what we just talked about for a
Mhm.
year or a year and a half or so. Go ahead, lock it in, and but use that also as a next step. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And because we say the job hopping could be a problem, job hopping is a problem when you keep being the victim.
Mhm.
And you keep and it comes out in your explanation: bad management,
Mhm.
bad boss, bad environment, bad pay, and that just makes you look bad. When you control the narrative, do the things that you'll control the narrative, and professional development, and train, or better yet, train on something you just learned so you can learn it better, so you can show some
Mhm.
mastery of that, and then people will see you a little bit different light, then you're taking even more control. It says I've not only learned it, but I can also train the at least the basics on it and show that. And you may have to be creative into that. And we have the tools right at our fingertips with the web and YouTube and Instagram and
Yeah.
all those things. You can show it even if you do it in segments. That's cool. But you may have to be creative to show that. But an employer can find you if you
Mhm.
show that you have those abilities, but you can also find them if you see what they need and that you become what I call the prescription to their job description. So, leaving with that, Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us. What do you have coming up? Is there an event? Is there a podcast? Is there a video? Are you going to be featured on Good Morning America? Anything? What do you have coming up that people should know and follow you about?
Fingers crossed. You know
Right.
what? I would just say for everyone to follow me for updates on my LinkedIn, because that's where I share my update with my new company. I'm also revamping my podcast, and that will be coming in February of 2022. So instead of Chelsea's Career Corner, it will be the Chelsea J Experience, and I will be talking about career and business as well, because a
Ah,
lot of those two intertwine. And I found that being an entrepreneur and my career, lots of overlap. So it'll be
mhm.
fun conversations.
Okay. Okay, Jack.
That's great. Um, I'm just doing the kind of usual stuff, and I've been fortunate lately. I'm really getting to speak to some really smart people, and this company included, is and learn from them, and then be able to share it with the Forbes readers. So it's cool. Like the other day, I spoke to Dr. Langer, who is the one of the co-founders of Moderna, and the guy's
Mm.
worth like $3 billion, and brilliant scientist, started like 30 other companies, and like the sweetest guy, like the nicest, humblest, genuine. I was so blown away. I was so blown. It's like, and then what's cool is that you know sometimes you see these people who are, let's say, like a Bezos or a Musk, who just braggarts and just wear it on their sleeve how wealthy they are. And then when you see somebody who's so down to earth and so humble and so successful,
Mhm.
it's a good feeling because it restores your faith in people. Like, hey, for every jerk that's out there, there's some really good folks. So yeah, so it's really cool. And like even today, Mark's great. We speak all the time, but just meeting you, I wasn't exaggerating. I was kind of taking notes here about what you're saying because I really like that advice, and I'll give you credit when I. So I'm thinking of like what kind of how I could put that in a piece moving forward, because I think that's like really smart advice and really good ideas of how to do it, and whether from you doing it as a business or just people as an individual with a company going to their bosses and say, hey, can you just listen to the issues I'm dealing with and bringing it up? So I think those are very powerful statements and ideas that you offered, and I'm definitely going to find a way to put it out there because I think that could help a lot of people.
Yes, excellent. So a lot of us expect to see some. You always are writing. You write more. I thought I wrote a lot. You write more than I do.
Yeah.
But I got a lot coming up. But let me tell you some of the people that I'm going to be talking to the next few weeks. Amanda Augustine. She's a part of the Talent Inc. group,
Oh my God, I remember
and
her from. She was at Ladders, right?
yeah, yeah,
Years
yeah.
years
She's
ago,
done a lot
right?
of stuff with ladders. I'll be talking to her about the trends of resume writing coming up in 2022 for the podcast. Terry Tresipio is somebody else, and I think I butchered her name. She has I think she has a TED Talk that's 2 million followers or 2 million views that she's had. She's written a book called Unfollow Your Passion. I'll be talking with her about that book. And also, I have Carla Bass. We come on. She is a Navy colonel or retired Navy colonel who wrote a book called Right to Influence, which I think is really important for everybody to kind of get a hold of. But that book has been out for some time now, but I'm gonna have a conversation with her for the podcast, and I've got a couple others I'm gonna keep under wraps. One really giant. Jack, you might be interested in even talking to this person. We'll have to talk a
Cool.
little bit offline. But in the meantime, and I was a part of Robin Ryan wrote this article. She included
Oh,
my
saw
wife
that. Yeah.
on Forbes. So check my timelines for that. That's on
Yeah,
one of
you're
my
busy.
timelines. Yep. So, and I got a couple of other ones too that are
That's
coming up.
awesome.
So I will.
All right, you're teasing this, Chelsea.
Yes,
Like,
I'm teasing,
now you got me.
but
I'm really curious. I'm biting.
yes, I know.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, check him out Friday on the Modern Job Search Checklist. We have Deborah Matthews is going to be on. She's a certified resume writer. We're going to talk about some resume writing trends and some other job search trends as we get into the practitioner side of job search. In the meantime, thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jack, for
Thanks.
joining once again. This is like we're going on like 60 something episodes
Wow,
with this.
that's crazy.
It is
It's
really
crazy.
nuts. And we started this September of
So
2021. So we've been
crazy.
doing this. I
Crazy.
think we only missed maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks out of the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's
I think
really
we're gonna
been
get a
something.
record of LinkedIn Live, right? We'll go for it. Let's
I
go for
know.
this. Like,
I
gotta
know.
find out what the number is.
Maybe a station will pick us up
Yeah,
eventually,
right.
right? But we can only hope. But in the meantime, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Chelsea, once again,
It's
thank
a
you
pleasure meeting you,
for
Chelsea.
joining us.
Thank
And
you.
Pleasure.
peace in the valley of love. We're done. See you next week.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.